The water had been Alex Carter's sanctuary for 24 years. At the community pool where he'd spent countless summer afternoons as a child, on his high school swim team where he'd broken 3 county records, and later at the local recreation center where he taught swimming lessons to supplement his income as a struggling graphic designer. Water was where Alex felt most alive, most free, most himself. The diving accident happened on a Tuesday evening in July, during what was supposed to be a routine practice session. Alex had done the same dive hundreds of times. A simple back dive from the 3-meter board, but something went wrong with his entry angle, and instead of slicing cleanly through the water, his head struck the bottom of the pool with a force that changed everything in an instant. The medical terms that followed were clinical and devastating. C5-C6 complete spinal cord injury, resulting in quadriplegia, no movement or sensation below the chest. No use of his hands or legs. At 29, Alex faced the reality that the body he'd trained and trusted for nearly 3 decades would never respond to his will again. The first months in the rehabilitation hospital were the darkest of Alex's life. Physical therapy focused on learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair, to transfer from bed to chair with assistance, to use adaptive equipment for basic daily tasks. But it was the occupational therapy sessions that brought the cruelest reminder of what he'd lost. Watching his hands lie motionless while therapists moved them through exercises, trying to maintain flexibility in limbs that would never again obey his commands. Alex had always been artistic. Even during his years as a graphic designer, he'd painted in his spare time, landscapes mostly, inspired by the outdoor adventures that had filled his life before the accident. His apartment had been filled with canvases depicting mountain trails he'd hiked, rivers he'd rafted, and swimming holes where he'd spent lazy summer days. After the accident, looking at those paintings became too painful, a reminder of a life that felt unreachable. "I can't even hold a brush anymore," Alex had told his occupational therapist, Sarah, during one particularly difficult session. "How can I be an artist if I can't move my hands?" Sarah had looked at him with the kind of direct honesty that good therapists master. "Who says art has to come from your hands?" she'd asked. That question had seemed absurd at the time. Of course art came from hands. How else could you draw, paint, sculpt, create? But Sarah had introduced Alex to the world of mouth and foot painting, showing him videos of artists who created breathtaking works using brushes held in their mouths or attached to their feet. "The accident changed how your body works," Sarah had explained, "but it didn't change your artistic vision, your creativity, or your need to express yourself. Those things come from your mind and your heart, not your hands." The first attempts at mouth painting had been frustrating beyond words. The brush felt foreign between his teeth, his jaw muscles cramped after minutes of use, and his control was so limited that he could barely make coherent marks on paper. But there was something about the act of creating, even clumsily, even painfully, that awakened something in Alex that had been dormant since the accident. Slowly, incrementally, Alex began to develop the muscle control and technique needed for mouth painting. He learned to grip the brush with his teeth in a way that allowed for subtle movements, to use his neck and jaw muscles to create different stroke pressures, to position his wheelchair and the canvas so that he could reach all areas of his work. But more than the technical skills, Alex discovered something profound about his new relationship with art. When he painted with his hands, there had been an unconscious ease, a taken-for-granted ability that allowed him to focus primarily on the visual result. Painting with his mouth required a different kind of presence, a deeper connection between intention and execution that made every mark deliberate, every color choice meaningful. "It's like learning a new language," Alex explained to his sister Jenny during one of her visits to his adapted apartment. "I have to think about every stroke, plan every movement, but that makes me more intentional about what I'm trying to say." The paintings that emerged from this new process were different from Alex's pre-accident work, more expressive, more emotionally raw, more powerful in their simplicity. Where his hand paintings had been technically proficient, but somewhat safe, his mouth paintings carried an urgency and authenticity that came from creating art against significant odds. Alex's breakthrough came 18 months after the accident, when he completed a self-portrait that captured not just his physical appearance, but something deeper, the journey from despair to acceptance, to a new kind of purpose The painting showed his face in profile, a brush held between his teeth, his eyes focused intently on something beyond the frame. It was a work that spoke to transformation, to finding beauty in limitation, to the persistence of the human spirit. Jenny had been the one to suggest that Alex enter the painting in a local art competition. "This isn't just good for someone who paints with his mouth," she'd told him. "This is just good, period." The painting won first place in the contemporary portraits category, and suddenly, Alex found himself being interviewed by local media, invited to speak at rehabilitation centers, and commissioned to create works for private collectors. The story of the quadriplegic artist who painted with his mouth resonated with people in ways that Alex never expected. "I think people connect with the idea that limitation can become liberation," Alex reflected during one interview. "Everyone has something that they think holds them back, something that makes them feel like they can't do what they want to do. Maybe seeing someone create art in a way that seems impossible gives them permission to find new ways around their own obstacles." The Family Feud opportunity came through the local spinal cord injury support group, which had nominated Alex for the show's special episode featuring people who had turned challenges into triumphs. The nomination letter had focused not just on Alex's artistic achievements, but on his work as a mentor to newly injured patients and his advocacy for accessibility in the arts. When Alex first received the call from the show's producers, his initial reaction was anxiety about the logistics. How would he manage the travel? Would the studio be accessible? Would they want him to demonstrate his painting technique on television? And if so, how would that work? But when he mentioned the opportunity to his support group, their excitement was unanimous. "Alex," said Maria, a woman who'd been paralyzed in a car accident 5 years earlier, "you have to do this. You show people that our lives didn't end when we got injured. They just changed direction." The producers had been incredibly accommodating, ensuring that the studio was fully accessible and offering to arrange for Alex to bring his painting supplies if he wanted to demonstrate his technique during the show. They'd also arranged for him to visit the set beforehand, to familiarize himself with the layout and ensure his comfort. The Carter family team consisted of Alex, Jenny, his parents Robert and Linda, and his best friend Marcus, who had been Alex's roommate in college and had remained his closest supporter through the entire journey of his injury and recovery. Marcus had been the one to modify Alex's apartment for wheelchair accessibility, to drive him to countless medical appointments, and to sit with him during the darkest moments of his adjustment period. Steve Harvey noticed Alex immediately during the pre-show warm-up. There was something about his presence, the way he carried himself with dignity, despite being in a wheelchair, the quiet confidence that suggested someone who had been tested and emerged stronger, and the obvious love and respect that his family showed him. But what struck Steve most was Alex's smile, genuine, warm, and completely without self-pity. "Alex," Steve said during introductions, approaching him with the respectful energy he reserved for contestants whose stories he sensed were particularly meaningful. "Tell me about yourself and what you do." Alex straightened in his wheelchair, his voice clear and strong. "I'm Alex Carter, from Portland, Oregon, and I'm a mouth painter. I create artwork using a brush that I hold between my teeth." Steve's eyebrows raised with genuine interest. "Mouth painter? How did you get into that?" Alex smiled, having learned to share his story without dwelling on the tragedy. 5 years ago, I had a diving accident that left me quadriplegic. I was an artist before the accident, but I painted with my hands. After the injury, I had to learn a completely new way to create art. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to my artistic development." Steve was intrigued by Alex's positive framing of what most people would consider a devastating loss. "How is it the best thing that happened to your art?" "When you paint with your mouth, every mark has to be intentional," Alex explained. "You can't rely on muscle memory or unconscious movements. You have to be completely present with every stroke. It made me a more deliberate artist, more connected to the emotional content of my work." Steve nodded, clearly moved by Alex's perspective and the way he spoke about his art with passion, rather than as compensation for loss. The game began against the Rodriguez family from Texas, and both teams proved competitive. Alex was sharp with his answers, demonstrating a quick wit and broad knowledge that impressed everyone in the studio. When questions required hand gestures or physical demonstrations, his family members would naturally assist without making it seem like Alex was dependent. During one round, when the category was things you might find in an art studio, Alex buzzed in confidently and answered, "Easel," explaining afterward with a grin, "I've become very familiar with adaptive easels that work at wheelchair height." Steve found himself fascinated by Alex's combination of humor, intelligence, and obvious artistic passion. During commercial breaks, Alex shared more about his work, describing the technique he'd developed and the emotional journey of rediscovering his creativity after the accident. It was during the fourth round that the question came that would allow Alex to articulate his deepest understanding about art and adversity. "We surveyed 100 people," Steve announced. "Name something that makes art beautiful." Alex was at the podium. The question felt like an invitation to share everything he'd learned about beauty, limitation, and the true source of artistic power. He thought about his pre-accident paintings, technically competent but emotionally safe. Then he thought about his recent work, raw, powerful, authentic in a way that came directly from struggle, transformed into purpose. "When it comes from places that hurt," Alex said clearly. The words carried such conviction, such hard-won wisdom, that the studio fell completely silent. Steve set down his cards immediately and approached Alex. "When it comes from places that hurt," Steve repeated softly. "Alex, that's profound. Tell me what you mean by that." Alex took a deep breath, realizing he was about to share the most important lesson his accident had taught him. "I used to think that art was about capturing beauty that already existed," Alex said, his voice gaining strength. "But I learned that the most powerful art comes from transforming pain into something meaningful. When you create from a place of struggle, when you turn limitation into expression, when you refuse to let circumstances stop you from sharing what's in your heart, that's when art becomes truly beautiful." The audience was completely absorbed in Alex's explanation. "My accident took away the use of my hands," Alex continued, "but it gave me something more valuable. It taught me that creativity isn't about the tools you use. It's about the need to express something that can't be expressed any other way. The paintings I create now come from a deeper place than anything I made before my injury." Jenny, watching from the family section, had tears streaming down her face. She'd witnessed Alex's entire journey from devastation to this moment of profound wisdom. Steve was visibly moved by Alex's perspective. "Alex, I need you to understand something. What you just described isn't just about art. It's about life. You're telling us that sometimes our greatest limitations become our greatest sources of strength." Alex nodded. "Exactly. I used to think my accident was the worst thing that could happen to me. But it forced me to discover capabilities I never knew I had. It made me find new ways to create, new relationships with my art, new understanding of what I'm capable of." Steve walked closer to Alex's wheelchair, his expression intense with respect and admiration. "Son, I've met a lot of artists in my career, but I've never met anyone who understood the relationship between struggle and beauty. The way you just described it, you didn't just overcome your disability. You transformed it into your greatest artistic tool." Alex smiled. The kind of smile that comes from complete acceptance of life's unexpected gifts. "The accident didn't end my story as an artist. It started my real chapter. Everything I painted before was practice for what I was meant to create." Marcus couldn't contain himself any longer. He moved from the family section to stand beside Alex's wheelchair. "Mr. Harvey," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "you should see Alex's studio now. The paintings he creates are incredible, not because he paints with his mouth, but because they come from this place of pure truth. He's not trying to prove anything to anyone. He's just sharing what he sees and feels, and it's more powerful than anything he did before." Steve looked at the friendship between Alex and Marcus, then back at Alex. "Alex, I want to ask you something. What would you want people to understand about disability, about art, about finding purpose after everything changes?" Alex considered the question carefully, understanding that his answer might influence how people thought about limitation, creativity, and the possibilities that exist even in the most challenging circumstances. "I'd want them to understand that disability doesn't mean inability," Alex said clearly. "It means finding new ways to do what you love. I'd want them to know that some of the most beautiful art, the most meaningful contributions, come from people who have had to adapt, who have had to find creative solutions to challenges that seem impossible. His voice grew stronger as he continued. And I'd want them to understand that what looks like limitation from the outside might actually be liberation from the inside. When you can't do things the way everyone else does them, you have to find your own way. And sometimes your own way turns out to be better than the conventional way. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card, but then he paused and reached for his phone. "Alex, I want to do something," Steve said. "I want to arrange for you to have an art show, a real gallery exhibition, where people can see your work and understand what you've accomplished. Because what you're creating isn't just art, it's proof that the human spirit can't be limited by circumstances." Alex's composure broke for the first time, tears flowing as he realized the magnitude of what Steve was offering. "That would mean everything to me," Alex whispered. "Not just for my career, but for everyone who thinks that injury or disability means the end of their dreams." Steve then did something unprecedented. He knelt down beside Alex's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level. "Alex, I want you to know that you've taught me something today that I'll never forget. You've shown me that true art, true beauty, comes not from perfection, but from the courage to create despite everything that tells you that you can't." He removed his suit jacket and gently placed it across Alex's lap. "This jacket has been with me through thousands of shows," Steve said. "But today, it belongs to someone who's shown me what real creativity looks like. You wear this, and remember that you're not an artist who happens to be disabled. You're an artist who discovered that limitation can become the greatest source of liberation." The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything the Family Feud studio had ever heard. The audience was on their feet, many crying openly, recognizing something profound in Alex's story that spoke to their own experiences of overcoming obstacles and finding new ways to pursue their passions. But the moment that would become legendary happened when Alex, with Steve's jacket across his lap, looked directly into the camera and said, "To anyone watching who thinks that injury or disability means the end of their story, it doesn't. It just means the beginning of a different chapter, and that chapter might be the most beautiful one you ever write." The episode aired 10 weeks later and immediately went viral. The clip of Alex explaining how he creates art with his mouth was shared millions of times. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about accessibility in the arts, about redefining ability, and about the relationship between struggle and creativity. Alex received thousands of messages from other people with disabilities, from artists facing their own challenges, and from viewers who had been inspired to pursue their own creative dreams, despite obstacles. But the messages that meant the most came from newly injured patients in rehabilitation hospitals, who wrote to thank him for showing them that life after spinal cord injury could still include purpose, passion, and beauty. Steve Harvey kept his promise about the art exhibition. 6 months after the Family Feud appearance, Alex had his first solo show at a prominent gallery in Portland. The opening night was attended by hundreds of people, including many from the spinal cord injury community and the broader disability rights movement. The centerpiece of the exhibition was the self-portrait that had won Alex's first competition, displayed alongside more recent works that showed his continued evolution as an artist. But the piece that drew the most attention was a new painting Alex had created specifically for the show, a vibrant, abstract work that seemed to pulse with energy and movement, created entirely with his mouth-held brush. The placard beside that painting read, "Liberation, oil on canvas, created with a brush held in the mouth." This piece represents the moment when limitation becomes possibility, when what we think holds us back becomes what sets us free. Today, Alex Carter is a successful professional artist whose works are collected internationally. He continues to paint with a brush held in his mouth, but his technique has evolved to a level of sophistication that rivals any traditional artist. His studio, specially designed for wheelchair accessibility, is filled with vibrant canvases that speak to his journey from despair to acceptance to triumph. He also works as a mentor and advocate, visiting rehabilitation hospitals to work with newly injured patients and speaking at conferences about disability rights and accessibility in the arts. He always wears Steve's jacket to these events, and it has become a symbol of his message that true limitation exists only in the mind. Alex still swims. Adapted swimming has become part of his physical therapy routine and a way to maintain his connection to the water that was such an important part of his pre-accident life. But now he understands that his real element isn't water, it's art, created not despite his disability, but through the new relationship with creativity that his injury made possible. In his studio, next to his specially designed easel and adapted painting supplies, hangs Steve Harvey's business card, alongside a photo from the Family Feud taping. But the most prominent display is a mirror with words Alex painted around the frame. What you think limits you might be exactly what liberates you. Because Alex Carter had learned that the most profound truth about creativity isn't about the tools you use or the methods you employ. It's about the irrepressible human need to transform experience into meaning, pain into beauty, limitation into a completely new kind of freedom. And in his studio in Portland, Oregon, a man who was told he would never create art again continues to paint masterpieces with a brush held between his teeth, proving every day that the human spirit recognizes no boundaries except those we accept for ourselves. Sometimes what breaks us also breaks us open to possibilities we never imagined. And sometimes the most beautiful art comes not from perfect technique, but from the perfect marriage of struggle and determination to create something meaningful against all odds.